So a real quick just point I'd like to make after the first meeting, that was an official like Green Party of Monroe County monthly meeting. And we thought it was going to be just a one-time thing. And everybody on the call, there was, give or two, when you add everybody up who came in a little late, they had to leave a little early, we had about 20 people on the call. And people who were at the end didn't want this to stop. They agreed that we should, as a group, not necessarily quote the Green Party. And I am wearing my shirt today, but that's not on purpose. I was wearing it for other Green Party activities I was doing early. And but this shouldn't be a Green Party activity. This should be a host of well, we hadn't made a decision. Is it going to be just a whole bunch of citizens? Is it going to be like the Police Accountability Board Alliance? And when I say that, I just mean in terms of an alliance of different groups with a few individuals sprinkled in. I'm not connecting the two subjects. I'm just talking about the structure. And I don't know, but I just know, and we can decide that as a group, but I just know that this really, I don't think it's going to be very effective if it's just seen as a Green Party endeavor. So I'm hoping that folks come in with the, thinking that, understanding that, yes, maybe this originated from a Green Party meeting, but that's not the intent here, is to keep this going as just a Green Party thing. So having said that, I would also like to share with you a proposed agenda. Real quick, introductions and roles, which we'll get to in just one side while we did the introductions. Review of the last meeting, just take a few minutes. I'll actually share my screen with the notes that we took from last meeting, just to remind us of what we kind of talked about real quick. I wanted to, additions to anything on the list, if we think that's not there, from folks either who weren't here or maybe have thought of something else in the 3 weeks since we've last been together. I thought we would take a few minutes and discuss the role of police in this, because well, there's a reason, and I'll explain why I thought I'd put that in when we get to that. And then I want to start doing it. Let's start creating some demands. It won't be done tonight by any means, but I want to just start talking about, okay, what are the systemic things that need to get changed to reduce violence in our community, and then we got to figure out if the way to do it to maybe start doing some research on these demands. And there's examples on that. Like if we believe, I'm going to come up with a silly one. Give everybody, make sure everybody in Monroe County has a soft furry blanket. Okay, like I said, I'm making up a silly thing. Meaning research on how it shows that soft furry blankets like help reduce violence, right? So we just don't make the demands. We can say, here's how. And I also have a surprise guest who's not here, who's going to be taking on a role, but he's not here tonight. And I'll explain that when we get to number 6. Maybe, if not come up with the name of this group tonight, then at least maybe a handful of people, or at least get people in the mindset of coming next time with some suggestions, and we can make a decision next time we get together. I'd also like to come up with our next meeting date before we finish, like before the very last thing, because number 9 is brainstorming how we're going to get people to this next meeting. And then, like we tend to do at the end, any announcements you have, any actions, any that have nothing to do with this, that don't have to, of anything that's coming up in the community that folks know about, they want to tell everybody else about. That's great to do that at the end. And there's the chat. Oh, okay. So roles. The only thing, I took it upon myself to be facilitator this week. And usually what we need is another person to help with keeping what's called the stack. And what that means is when people want to speak, they could either raise their hands or put it in the chat or use their electronic raise hand. And it's like a digital getting in line. We tend to use a progressive stack. So that means if you've been talking a lot, like me, and somebody else who hasn't spoken yet or as much is online for the stack, then that person usually gets moved up ahead. Or if it's somebody who comes in with a lot of privileges, like me, white, male, straight, everything but having a lot of money, usually they tend to wait. It's called a progressive stack. So I need a person who'd be interested in keeping track of the stack. I did not mean to rhyme there. I apologize. Anybody?
I don't know how to do it. I mean, I would do something, but like, I don't know how to do that.
Well then, all right, let's try it.
I'll be happy to. Oh, I'm just going to say I'll do it if anyone doesn't want to do it.
All it is you just pay attention to who like raises their hand in some way to say that they want to talk. You just decide, then you tell us who's next.
I would rather not then. I'm just telling
Jason.
you, I'm good. You
Okay.
know
All right,
me.
Jason, you're it.
All
All right. Oh my God, so much power.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
So powerful.
so let me just suggest then, if you don't mind, Dave, anyone who would like to speak, simply just open the chat. Say that you raise your. This will be easier for me than using the raise your hand feature. Just type in that you would like to speak, and I will keep track of who's on the list and make sure everyone gets a chance to speak in the order in which they are.
Okay. Jen seems to have her using the chat while on her phone thing. I think she's on her phone. So that's the only thing I get worried about is some folks who use their phone have a more difficult time using the chat. So, but that's fine. If you're not able.
Does the hand raising feature work on the phone? Because I can keep track of that if necessary.
It works on my. I mean, I'm using my tablet right now, but it does work on my iPhone.
Okay. Yeah.
It
Either
works
one's
on
fine.
my iPhone too.
Okay. Great. All right. I just want to make sure everyone's included. I don't want to leave anybody out. That's the only thing. All right. So holler at Jason if you'd like to get on. Let me do a quick review. I will again share my screen and show you the notes. These are put up on the video that's on YouTube. This is the meeting from last time. So reasons for gun violence, we had talked about methods, means, and motive. Too many people having guns, patterns of how these events happen, why people want to kill each other in terms of basic needs, hopelessness, alienation. Suicides can also be gun violence, domestic violence escalating, impulsivity, the selling of legal and illegal guns, and the media gives mass shooters 24/7. So we just brainstormed. We didn't make any decisions. We just throw out your ideas on what could politicians do. Raising age for gun ownership, needing more research on causes and implications, see the CDC as a public health issue, concerns of surveillance technology being overused or used incorrectly, taking care of children and parents before kids are born, change the way we sell guns, the military and the government setting a bad example, teach better ways of dealing with conflict, going after capitalism, more mental health services, and guns for toys, a guns for toys drive. And I just real quick, I think I saw a thing on Facebook that I think RPD is doing a gun exchange thing sometime soon. I don't really see it being blasted all over the place, but it would be nice if they did. But I know the research isn't all that.
I mean, does that even work?
The research says it doesn't do that.
Yeah, I'm like, I kind of find that hard to believe that works very well.
So are there, and I'm taking notes, so are there any, in terms of additions to the lists of causes or solutions, and I'll stop sharing. Is there anything that we think should be added to that right now off the top of our heads?
Yeah, I think parenting classes, skills, something. I think parents need to get a handle on their teenagers.
Okay.
Dave, what should, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I do the stack correctly.
Yep.
I don't want to chime in with my own ideas before people have had their chance to do that as well. So I'll save myself. Dave, if you should happen to think that we're all done with everyone else, I'll throw in my 2 cents at the end of that part of the conversation. But otherwise, if you want to be on stack, just chat, notify me in the chat.
And Jason, the way it usually works is the stack master. I don't know if that's an official title.
I like it.
All right, yeah, I don't actually. I don't. But the stack person usually just says stack themselves and puts themselves in. But that's fine. We'll make it work. It's all good.
Okay.
Call me Stacker.
And you're the oh yeah, and you're the stacker, Jason. So
Stacker.
you're up. Oh wait,
I'm
no,
the
Jen
stacker,
just cut in
okay.
front of you.
As per my the other group that I mentioned, the conversations we're having, which by the way, not everyone has the same ideas as me, but I'd like to make sure people know that we've got some ideas and some ambitious ideas being discussed elsewhere too. I would like to put down that I think the problem is the Second Amendment. I know that's probably not popular, but I think there's very little that's going to change in this country until we face up to the fact that the way we sell guns, who we allow to have guns and what type of guns is, in my view, the signature problem. We can do all sorts of things that could moderate, deal with parenting, toys for gun drives, all that stuff. I think that's just, I think that's ultimately ignoring the real problem. And the real problem is that we have the most lax gun laws in the Western world, and our homicide rates testify to the results of that. I think that we ought to think seriously about passing laws that restrict the type of guns that are sold, the amount of ammunition that's sold, and basically take a real hard look at the Second Amendment itself as the major problem. I see someone's hand was up. Let me.
But Jay,
that's Linda. Okay.
yeah, but Jen's,
Anyway, that's my
Jen's
2 cents
first.
right there.
Yeah, I just
Hold
want to chime in
Jen,
there.
hold time. Jen's up first. Jen was in the chat before.
Oh, sure.
Oh, that is okay. Go right ahead, Jim.
So I agree. I think that we have a very strange love affair with guns in this country. I think too, though, that looking at the illegal activities that often occur around guns, particularly in urban areas like Rochester, I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done around socioeconomic issues in order to reduce that level of gun violence. Like it's more than parenting. It's, whether or not people have enough food on the table. It's can they pay the rent? How are they paying the rent? All of those kinds of, have they finished school? Does school even work for them? Does school listen to them? All of those kinds of issues that we also need to get at. I'm done.
I think Linda was next after Jen.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks, Jennifer. I was just gonna. It's just I've just got a one-liner response to Jason. I think mentioned in what he said a minute ago in terms of gun violence. Mentioned homicides. I just wanted to point out, and I've been kind of checking the figures over the last couple of months or so that 2 out of 3 gun deaths are caused by suicide, not by homicide, or mass shootings. And I think that we need to really take into account that, and that might be something that leads more on to what Jennifer is saying in terms of the kinds of support and social services that we might, if suicide is the number one leading cause of deaths by guns, I think that's really important.
Well,
I
nobody
didn't
else.
even know that. That's really great information, Linda.
Well, I don't believe there's anybody else on the stack really quick. I mean, I can, but I can talk anytime. Chris, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah. Sorry I'm late. I am Green Party of Monroe County's male co-chair. We have both male and female co-chairs instead of one chair. I guess I'm not sure what more there is to say. I've been in politics for a while.
You're good.
Haven't won because I do a third party, but we keep trying. I mean, I guess as long as I'm talking here, I'll sort of try to insert myself in the conversation, hopefully intelligently. It's one of the things I always think about when we restrict access to guns is that, in other countries, they still have like mass murders. In China, they have stabbing sprees. And I guess it's an improvement because less people would die. if they didn't have guns, but I think the underlying causes of what makes someone want to kill their fellow human beings has to be addressed, because we can tie their hands, but we can't. Ultimately, there's a destructive, unhealthy energy that comes from a lot of places. It comes from, partly it's just our society is built on relations of power and domination, and that encourages people to act out that way. So there's a lot. We really need a holistic approach to solve it.
Sorry, it took me a while to write domination down. Sorry. That's my issue. Yeah, I'll stack. I don't think there's anybody else around. I mean, I actually thought of that about just abolishing the Second Amendment myself, and that'd be great. It's it won't make the guns magically disappear, the 400 million or so that are already out there. So it's a step without question, and it's one that would take. If you're forcing me to put a time thing on this, I think it would take a decade to usually amendments take that long, just because of how difficult it is. So I'm not saying it's not worth doing. I'm just saying, yeah, it would be such a heavy lift that we can't just leave it to that. There's got to be other stuff. I mean, we have a lot of stuff on just our list from people coming together. So, Linda, I think you're next. I'm just looking.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the Second Amendment or any law, universal law. This idea that we can scrap the Second Amendment, sounds like a reasonable idea because it's terribly outdated. But just this idea that anything can be written in stone 200 years ago and somehow count as the truth 200 years later when society has changed so much, that there should be a law against universal timeless laws. Anything that's ever passed as a piece of legislation or a law should by law be up for revision 10 years later, depending on the way that society has perhaps changed. So universal and timeless laws, I think, in and of themselves, like the Second Amendment, which is so outdated and ridiculous for the present kind of 2022 situation, is in and of itself a really big problem.
Yeah.
You don't need them.
I heard a voice.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, I put myself on stack there, so I'll just, I agree with what Linda said. And I also think regarding the difficulty of doing something like, getting the Second Amendment repealed, if that was even something we desired. I don't think there's any solution that we can propose that would not be a heavy lift. I almost can't even imagine that there's any solution we could propose that wouldn't be as equally a heavy lift as something as dramatic as, I'm sorry, there's something outside. Equally as difficult to do as a dramatic change like changing the Second Amendment. But I would also like to suggest that one of the problems with the effects of the overabundance of guns in our society is that I think the guns themselves lead to a lot of the problems that we are looking at as far as being the root causes. I think, violence, and as Greens, we should understand this, violence begets violence begets violence. And so when criminal activity involves more guns, that tends to involve more gun homicides, which leads to more mass shootings or drive-by shootings, which leads to more people injured and crippled, and then the cycle of vengeance itself created by guns. What I'm saying is that in that way, guns themselves do serve to be as one of the roots of the poverty and the despair that we sometimes think are the roots of the crime that then leads to guns. I think the guns themselves are leading to the social ills that then beget more gun violence itself. So I think nipping the problem in the bud by addressing guns specifically is just as legitimate a solution as trying to deal with things like poverty, mental illness, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't see anyone else on stack right now.
Oh, can I say something?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Jason, I think it was you maybe last time who talked about the gun laws in Japan.
Mhm.
Was it you? Okay.
It might have been New
'Cause
York
that-
for us.
Yeah, I mean, that's always, I mean, I learned about that, several years ago about how they did that there. And I'm like, I don't understand why other country, I think it's kind of genius the way they do it. It's fair. I just don't understand why every country doesn't do it like that. It's pretty great. And yeah, that's kind of, I mean, it's weird. I come from my father was a hunter. So we ate food from that he killed and, all that kind of stuff. And so I have a weird feeling about guns. Like I really just don't have an issue with somebody who hunts. And I mean, I realize nobody has to hunt. You don't have, I mean, most of the time you don't have to hunt, but sometimes you do if you're poor. And so I guess that, I suppose that could go along with food poverty too, and having to hunt because you're poor. And so you have to do that as well. I suppose it goes along with that. But then some people really do like to know what they ate, exactly what they killed. So I feel like there's got to be, that's why I like what goes on in Japan. It doesn't say you can't have guns. It says you can have guns, but you have to like do all these tests and make sure that you're okay to have it. And that's really what I would love to see, because I don't feel like everybody needs to have their gun taken away from them. I don't feel that way. I don't know if other people feel, but
And there are countries too, in Europe, France, Switzerland, probably other ones, where you are allowed to own guns, but they have very strict guidelines about what kind of guns you can have.
Right. Yeah.
Mental health and checks and training that is required for anyone to own a gun. All of that stuff goes by the wayside in this country. The Buffalo shooting, the Uvalde shooting, and the 4th of July shooting, just to name the 3 most recent mass shootings that everyone's aware of. In every case, all the person needed was a credit card. They just went in Chicago. He had to have a specific license, but more or less, you don't have to prove your mental fitness. You'd never have to justify the kind of gun that you're buying, and you don't have to prove that you have any kind of training or at all planning on using the gun responsibly. And even those improvements would allow the Second Amendment to be maintained under a much more sensible regime. But in this country, we basically hand out guns like Halloween candy, and I think that's a huge part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Susan?
I was just going to say you need a license for many things these days. To be a doctor, to be a psychiatrist, to be a nurse, to be, you have to pass tests to be a police officer. And yet you can just get a gun and do what you want. And not only that, but, then we have the problem of the ghost guns. So, and nobody has any idea where they're coming from, I guess, or they're coming from online somewhere. So yeah, I think it's a big problem. I agree.
Linda's on stack next.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just thinking right here about it's not even about professional people having licenses necessarily to go and treat people. I have to pass a driving test before I can drive a car, or pharmaceutical companies have to have their drugs tested before they can put them out on the market. It seems to me like with regard to guns, they're way down the bottom of the chain when it comes to any kind of test, like what about we do a driving test, what about using a gun test? And you get your license, and your license can be revoked if you don't drive properly, or if you don't shoot properly, your license can be revoked. There's nothing in place for, like, you have to be 18 before you can have a drink. There's a bunches of things I think that are on kind of parallel.
Thank you. Dave had his hand up, I think.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna the specifics on the gun, on anything gun related, we can start to work on that on like 5 and 6, if that's okay. I'm just looking at time, and I just want to make sure that we, again, I'm just trying to respect folks' time. But I mean, that's something that we'll be getting to, is starting to do that, and I have a feeling what direction that's going to go too. So if it's okay, I would like to, you know what? It has been a while. So sorry about this. I should have done this at the beginning. And Jen did warn that she's out on vacation. I think her and her husband were on a boat. I saw fishing poles. So I have a feeling that her Wi-Fi is gone. I'm just putting in the chat right now the agenda that I had up. Sorry, I should have done that like 20 minutes ago. Sorry about that. So if it's okay, I'd like to take a few minutes and start talking about the role of the police. And then really just start getting into some of the different things that we should be calling for. But the reason I separated this is because I'm just in the past 3 weeks, I've been to a lot of activity, a lot of events. I've talked to individual people about coming on to participating in this, and just having conversations, including at the was Peace the Rock Festival. It's an annual thing that Santa Cotton does every year, and I got to talk to a lot of people on the issue. And there were folks who were like, we want more cops on the streets, we want cameras all over the place, and they just want to throw folks in jail. And I thought it might be important to ask if it would be okay if we did not, Jen's coming back, if we did not focus on police in this. And let me rephrase that. I was stumbling on how to propose this, that we can decide as a group that while we don't have to take a stance about more police, I would like to have that, make sure that's not one of our demands, if that's okay. Look, I don't live in
I would like us also to focus on what is the role of the police, because I'm not even clear what that is right now.
Well, I'd like to share something, and I really shared it with Melissa. I just finished a book, right? The End of Policing. And honestly, I did this for another project I'm working on, and nothing to do with this in general. But as you can see by all the Post-it notes I have in here, it really fit a lot of stuff that we're talking about. And what really I think could help us, not so much, well, yeah, I do think the concept of not using the police to help try and solve this. One, because we've been trying to do that for decades, if not centuries, and it hasn't worked. In fact, it's just gotten worse. And that two, this book, and the author's name is Alfred Vital. The things that he uses research and does, says that what we should be doing instead, he doesn't necessarily to focus on gun violence specifically, but just to improve stuff, is I think a lot of the things that we've already talked about, some of the demands, or like the list of solutions that we had from last week, and even a little bit leaking into this week. So I was hoping that we could, because I think that to be able to do something that's cohesive and really has some heft to it and should be taken seriously, I think there might be a huge disagreement amongst us in terms of giving the police more resources to militarize even more our streets. And honestly, it ain't going to be my street. They're not going to be parked out of my street. So I'm saying this not as someone who's worried about the police up and down my street or cameras at the end, but for people in other parts of the city who it is my opinion, again, all the privilege, they don't deserve to live like that. And there's other ways of dealing with it. So that was my reason I'm wanting to bring it up. Is it okay if we just make sure we're not calling for more cops? Like what Jason said, the term violence begats more violence and stuff like that. Okay, I'll just leave that out there. We can argue.
Sure.
Who's next?
Well, let me just chip in very quickly, since we're at the stage where we're discussing what our demands and our suggestions are. I just remind you guys one more time, you scroll back up the chat, the joint statement, the first draft of which I posted, has 5 suggestions that are more or less from me, but I'm I and the other Greens are still hashing them out. And I'd be grateful for anyone who wants to read them and send me some comments on whether or not you think they're legitimate or counterproductive. But anyway, that's my my addition to the conversation on what exactly our demands ought to be.
Jen, you are a master at zooming on a phone, man. I got to tell you, I could never do that. I'd be swearing trying to type that stuff. Man, I don't know how you do it. But
It took a lot of practice. The
Okay.
beginning of COVID, all I had was
All
a phone or a computer. So.
yeah, and what you said is a lot of that's in this book, and one of the reasons I really like it is there's a lot of research and a ton of footnotes. It took me twice as long to read this thing because I kept going to the footnotes. It's really well done. I'm hoping to have the author on a podcast, something I do outside of here, and then I'm hoping from that maybe I can even involve him into kind of what we're doing a little bit. But I'll take baby steps. I'll crawl before we run. So is there anybody else that has a the less? I mean, if we just say, I can do this now. I can connect this now. And this can even segue into like the actual demands to start working on. So rather than just saying defund the police and take that money and give it for this, and this, all these things, while that could be a partial argument to what we're saying, there is, oh man, I'm not even gonna get started. I'll wait till the master is with us at some way. It's on this. For Rochester, there is so much money in the city and county budgets that we misuse and do just unnecessary stuff with. It's literally like throwing it down a hole. Anything that we want to do, universal daycare for Monroe County, anything that we call, there is money to do it. If you go right to City Hall or the county's websites and you look at the latest budget, it'll show you how it just evens out or how there's a little bit of a negative or something like that. But the way we misuse money at the local government, both county and city, is not only a crime, which I think literally it is, but we have the money to do anything that we can come up with. And we just have to insist that we don't give it to developers anymore, and we don't just spend it on things just to have a pretty sign or something like that. When we have, Riverwalk's great, but we got how many thousands of kids who are homeless that we know from the city school district. And then let's not even, I don't even know, and Jen might know this more than me. I don't even know if there's stats on homelessness in the county schools. I have no idea. Yeah, but we know about the city because they did that survey a year or two ago. Yeah. So, so I can announce this now. One of the people who's going to be helping us, he can't make it tonight, is Alex White. And Alex, for those who don't know, well, not only has he run for office as mayor and city council in the past, but even though his days of running for office are done, physically he can't, his knees are done, he can't do the door-to-door, that kind of stuff. He still pours over the budget every year. He does a radio show and talks about all this stuff. He knows where the money is. He knows where this money's hidden or misused, and he can be our guru on when we say, hey, someone says, oh, great ideas, how are you going to pay for it? Here's how you pay for it. We will have whatever we come up with, Alex is going to help us figure out how to pay for it. So I thought I would make that so defunding the police can be part of it, right? Or reducing the police, whatever. It doesn't have to be, because from what I've seen from Alex's research, we've got the money to do anything we want. That's the political pressure we would have to put on. Hey, how about we stop giving all these tax breaks and use that money for these things? So, I'm sorry, Susan, I saw your hand, and then Melissa.
Actually, Melissa was first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. All right.
Okay, so yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, I see what you're saying, Dave, and I mean, to me, that's kind of excited to think that there is money. How do we get them to care enough about simple things like children, like their schools? I mean, I'm sure many of us here have seen pictures or have read articles or stuff about seeing like how decrepit our schools are. It's pretty bad. And something as simple, something like that, like I don't understand why these people don't care about the children. I mean, I know that sounds like so trite. Why don't we care about the children? But why don't they care about the children for real? Like, why is the money going to something else instead of taking care of things like having a proper school? And if they don't, how can we get them to care enough about it?
Yeah, you know what? I'm always interested in hearing from Chris, because I know he does a lot of thinking. Since that seems to be an open-ended question, but could Chris answer it or take a stab at it?
Anybody?
There's hands up.
Because I know he can.
There's hands up.
Oh, I know this hand. Would anyone mind if I would actually like, because Chris is one of our politicians, so I'd actually like to, if no one minds, then we'll get to the stack, because I'm keeping track. It's Susan, then Linda. But you know, I'd like to hear an answer to that from somebody.
I mean, if Chris
I
knows
think
something.
that's the facilitator's role, would be to put Chris in. Chris doesn't have his hand up right now, so
Yeah,
really,
That's
It should be.
Chris is a white male too, Jason, and you have two women that you're overriding here in the stack. So I would rather we follow stack on this one. Thank you.
Right. And Susan is next.
Thank you. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I've been very frustrated with Mayor Evans and his lack of leadership. And I have called his office many times about the traffic the traffic situation on Lake Avenue, and that the fact that they're not doing anything about that, and everything that goes on this street. And others. It's not just this one. It's Mount Reed also. It's a few others. But all I see him doing is photo ops. This is supposed to be our leadership person. What in the world is he doing? I think we need to call him out and say, what are you doing? You know, like everyone was upset with Lovely. And, you know, I think when people finally got fed up with her, I think it made a difference a little bit. You know, but I mean, I'm not trying to compare him to her, but it's really pathetic that we can't seem to find a good leader. And I do know Alex White. I have met him before. I have voted for him. I voted for him for city council. It was too bad he didn't make it. I know he's a very brilliant guy. It's too bad that he's not, you know, a leader here, because I think he has that ability. But I'd just like to hear how the rest of you feel about the leadership. Thank you.
Okay.
Or the lack
Linda
of.
was next. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, so I'm just going to point out that I feel that the discussion has started to be a little bit derail from the discussion of guns. And so, you know, Dave a moment ago was talking about all of this money in the budget, and then somebody else started talking about taking care of children and using the money to do that rather than other stuff. But there's been no discussion yet of how we might use that money for gun violence, and that was just the thing I wanted to bring it back to. And I know that leadership is also has something to do with that, but unless you're talking about Malik's position on gun violence, which I don't think he had a platform on, and comparing it to Leslie's, it may not be the right thing to be discussing right now in a forum that's supposed to be about gun violence.
I'm sorry. I do think leadership has to do with gun violence. I mean, nobody's standing up there doing anything. We have no leadership in Rochester. So I do think it's a very important part of what's going on here. There is no leadership, which is terrible, especially since we have, what, are we up to 46 murders now? And, you know, this guy's out doing photo ops, like, I don't know, brand new building or whatever the hell it is. And it's like, come on, let's show some leadership here, you know, from his side of it. Honestly, I won't vote for him again. I want someone who's gonna, you know, be a leader, you know, who's gonna show something. Because we're all flailing here, you know, and it's scary. I mean, I hear my neighbors on the neighborhood chats that don't want to leave their houses. They're afraid to go out. They're afraid to drive. They're afraid to, you know, just step out. You know, and we don't live in the bad part of the city, although it's becoming that bad. So, and, you know, a lot of us are thinking about moving. I think leadership is a really big problem and issue.
Thank you. Davis next.
I'm going to pass to Chris because I've been speaking a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk about the, you know, role of police here, and I think it's important that we don't embrace that as the solution. I mean, that's what the Republicans always say when, you know, these mass shooting events happen. We'll just put a cop in every classroom. That's a terrible idea. Just would turn it into a prison, right? I mean, we don't want to live in that kind of society where we respond to every problem by having, you know, armed police officers and you know, like, you know, quite frankly, if you talk to some people that you know, the police don't protect, right? And you that, you know, experience firsthand how the police are a white supremacist institution, and you tell them that police should be the only ones with guns, you know, that doesn't go over. You know, I mean, a lot of, if you live next to, you know, people who are engaging in criminal activity and violent people, and you can't call the police for protection, right? You might want to get a gun. I mean, and it's a response to a sick society, but it's still, you know, a rational response. And the idea, if we just send in more police to have more of an oppressive presence, like that's just going to fuel that same problem. And, you know, and I will also, you know, just briefly address, you know, what Jason said. I mean, you know, if your leaders aren't performing, you have to replace them, right? I mean, I was at last time I ran for city council, I was at a community forum. And it was when, I remember Sister Grace was in the audience, right? Because she laughed when I talked about smug time, right? That word. But basically, I mean, just nothing changes because these people benefit from the status quo. And as long as they continue to benefit from the status quo, they're not going to change. And we need to you know, make them uncomfortable. So that's what I have to say about that.
Why doesn't Dave, did you still want to speak?
All I was going to say is that I think where we are, or what our plans of what to do, I don't mean the specifics, but just in terms of creating a list of demands, is, in theory, would hold these elected people accountable So, because obviously we're going to be demanding that they're the ones that are going to have to enact this stuff and change the budgets to do that. So I think we will be, I don't want to say going after, that's not the right term, but they're the ones we're going to have to be yelling at because they're the ones that are going to supposedly have the power to change these things. But we just got to come
Holding
up
them-
with the things.
Holding them accountable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what our demands will. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Both in the demands themselves and how we demand it and how we do it and how often and how consistent, that also holds them accountable as well. So again, I will totally stress that this is not a Green Party meeting, but I will say that part of what I've been doing as because we're all volunteers, is looking for candidates for next year. And I'm fairly certain that anybody who would want to run as a Green would be down with whatever it is we're going to come up with. So, you know, that's also going to put pressure on the people who are in office, whether they're running for election again next year or not. So yeah, we'll definitely we have to we have to take it to the leaders, our elected officials, because those are the people who can do the stuff. So yeah.
Okay, I put myself on stack. So one thing I just want to make sure that we stay focused on, I think Linda said this earlier too.
Yeah.
It could be easy especially when we come to the question of demands and or leaders that we would like to articulate our agenda. It could be very easy for us to get distracted from the very topic that we're dealing with here, which is not simply violence, not simply crime, not simply social ills, but the specifics of gun violence itself, you know, murder, suicide, and things having to do with this particular technology, which of course is, you know, not new at all. But that's the sort of thing that I'm going to assume that we're here because we feel like all things being equal, things are made much, much worse by the reckless use of guns, as opposed to simply what might take place if guns didn't exist. Because there would still be murder, there would still be violence, people would use knives or saps or whatever. But I hope that as we contemplate things to include in any potential list of demands or any conversation going forward, we don't lose track of the very specific type of social ill that we're dealing with, which is violence having to do with guns themselves and how to bring that under control. That, of course, is a challenge unto itself, but it will be more challenging if we don't keep our focus on that specifically instead of, you know, going off in every possible tangent. Because obviously, gun violence is only one type of violence, and all violence is bad, and all crime is bad. But I think we can at least agree, and I guess what I'm trying to say is let's make sure we keep our focus on the fact that what we do agree with is that whether or not you like guns or hate guns or not, the reckless use of guns in our society, the overabundance of them, and the horrible types of crime that only can exist because of guns is the thing we're trying to mitigate. So I hope we'll make sure that we don't lose that focus, or else we'll just be coming up with a list of desires or demands that could be addressed under any circumstance. Let's see here. Is there anyone else on stack? I don't see anyone.
No. On that note, I was going to take it to the next thing on our agenda, if that's okay. Quick showing that we're talking about starting to create demands. And in doing that, I will reshare. I made it bigger, and it also got rid of Giuliani's face, which is right underneath. I made everything bigger. So it's bonus that we don't have to see Rudy. Here's what we had before, and we've talked about some other things. I thought what might be, maybe this be the only thing we do for today in terms of the demands, would be to come up with the subject matter, subject heading. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I'm having a hard time explaining. I can do examples. It'll be easier. So what I'm talking about is starting with breaking this up into categories. Categorizing. There's the word. Categorizing. And the easy way to start is I'm just going to use kind of like the basic needs, because there are thousands of people in our community whose basic needs are not being met. So, and I'm just jotting stuff down, and I'm jotting down what y'all say too. But so I'm thinking starting with food, clothing, shelter. That's the saying, right? That everybody needs. You gotta have, before you move up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you gotta have food, clothing, shelter. I would also, now yes, it doesn't say anything specific about food, it doesn't say anything specific about clothing or shelter, but just I'm hoping we could get some categories first, and then maybe I thought maybe folks would want to like pick one and maybe take the next couple weeks or week or whatever and come up with some ideas on it and bring it back to the group. That was my idea, but we don't have to do it that way. But let's start with the categories. So food, clothing, and shelter, what else should be addressed by the government that would help reduce violence?
Could I chip in for
Yeah.
just one moment?
Yep.
That already feels like what I just said. It feels like we're deviating a bit from the premise of gun violence, because you said, what do we do to address violence as opposed to gun violence? So could you, I mean, I don't understand exactly what you're driving at with food, clothing, and shelter as relates to this specific topic. Maybe you could clarify a bit.
Well, it's, again, unless we're only going to look at guns, then we're going to be dealing with violence in general. Because I'm not disagreeing with you, Jason, there's too many guns, right? But if that's the only solution we have, just get rid of all the guns. Okay.
How about educating the public on gangs and what they look like? Because I don't think a lot of us even know, and it's the main reason why there's so many guns here.
Yep. Okay. Gangs.
I
see. Yep. I see. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. I almost did Jason. I almost did your role. Sorry.
But yeah, if people just want to use the hands up button, just so I can keep track of the stack. But
sorry.
Okay, so okay, Linda, you're good to go.
Yeah, just in terms of research, and I think anything that's gonna approach the question of gun violence probably needs to be, you need to start with a bottom-up analysis of what the problem is. And so I think what might be kind of useful is just some research on how many suicides are caused by gun violence, how many homicides are caused by gun violence, how many deaths in Rochester are caused by police shooting victims, because I know that the police just generally are responsible for about 10% of total murder victims. So that would be a way of getting into the problem of arming our police, not so much defunding them, but disarming them and giving them other means of interacting with the public and troublesome situations, and also for just stranger homicides like Breonna Taylor in whatever city that was. The police burst into her apartment without a warrant and shot her to death and seriously disabled her boyfriend. So just kind of like root analysis, I'd really like to see some stats of we know we have a gun problem in Rochester. Are they mostly homicides? Are they mostly suicides? How many of those are caused by police? And then once we figure that, then maybe that then provides paths into other kinds of research about solutions for those particular problems.
There.
Chris is next.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that we can't narrow things down too much. I mean, the people who are mentally ill need treatment. The problems in our society that are caused by poverty and alienation and oppression, right, are really the root cause. And I don't think that just because, right, if we can't talk about giving people like universal health care. I think that's the most important thing, right, is get people who are mentally ill treatment, right, especially when you're talking about the mass shooter type things. But I mean, even the people who are engaged in gang violence, that's because our society is mentally ill that it creates those situations. And just because a solution might also solve a second problem at the same time doesn't mean we should discard it and not talk about it. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I just, want to echo what Dave said and saying that, making sure that people have their basic needs provided for, and that's not something you're going to have to worry about and fight other people about. That's very important. I mean, that should definitely be on our list of demands.
Yeah, but I just want to say, Chris, that not everybody that doesn't have the basics provided for them either go out and kill somebody. So that kind of seems like a pretty top-down approach for a lot of the ills in society that's not necessarily focusing in on gun violence. And if this is a conversation about gun violence, then yeah, it needs to be a little more specific than that.
I agree.
Mental health treatment?
Well, to that point, because we seem to have circled around back to something I said earlier. I guess my question to the group would be then, to whom are these requests / demands meant to be presented? Because that sort of will bring our ideas into focus. Whether it's gun violence through guns directly or gun violence because of poverty or crime or whatever. Ultimately, this collaboration we're having right now, and then as laid out by the itinerary that Dave drew up, ultimately it has to come to some ideas that have to be either thrust in front of a politician or a department, or else becomes the subject matter on which we run a campaign ourselves. So I guess I'm kind of curious where this conversation, where Dave and the rest of us ultimately think that this conversation ought to lead. What would we do with the demands that we come up with, or the program that we would like to see implemented? What's supposed to become of it out of this group is something I'd like to know. And I see we have Dave's hand up and Jennifer. I know who raised their hand first. Was it you?
Jen.
Jennifer. Okay, so then, anyway, that was my open-ended question. Jennifer, then Dave, please. So Jennifer, you could go.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. I'm trying to do too many things at once. So my thought was going off of what Jason had said. Certainly access to healthcare in general is an issue in Monroe County. There are not enough therapists currently, or at least enough therapists who want to continue to engage in that work due to lots of reasons that we've, as a society know, same as teachers. But I just don't know if that is really a root cause of gun violence. Like, I've worked with the seriously mentally ill for decades, and none of the people that I've worked with have ever engaged in the type of mass shootings that we've seen. While mental illness might possibly play a role in the things that we've seen, especially when you're looking at it being, transition age white boys, men, that's not the deciding factor. It's the access, and it's how they enact their illness, if that is the issue, that is at issue here. That's what I wanted to say.
And then Dave.
So yeah, I'll move my hand now. Yes, not everybody who has a mental illness is going to have a gun and going to do something like a Buffalo or a Texas type thing. And that hasn't been really an issue, well, close to it, since the Boys and Girls Club incident of 10 years ago. I'm sorry, I'm kind of estimating there. I'm not sure. I don't remember how long ago that was. About 10 years ago. There really hasn't been a mass shooting, anything like that we're talking about with those other places. And I'm not saying that means we shouldn't be focusing on it, but most of the folks who in the Monroe County area that are concerned are more concerned about the beefing between two people, whether it's individuals or as member of gangs, and not only them getting hit with gunfire, but also bystanders getting hit as well, and making it so that people, like Susan's saying, don't want to come out of their houses. And that's the day to day. Very few people are walking around, at least in Rochester, concerned about a mass shooting like that. And again, I think the things that we're working on deal with both of those situations. The mental health issues, and it's not always mental health that makes somebody do something like Buffalo and stuff like that. So I think that the type of things we've already started talking about, the broad topics, the categories, getting specific, I think will help reduce violence, gun violence, mass shootings. I think it will all be incorporated into that to some degree. There is no one solution. There is no, I'll just keep doing it until someone makes me stop. There is no silver bullet here. I will keep using that pun until someone says, okay, Dave, it's done now. And I can give I'm sorry, I am talking a lot, but let me give a quick example. Okay. And this might address a couple of questions that people have talked about. A thing that I'm envisioning, which doesn't mean squat, it's just one person having an idea, is what the demands that we have may end up going to separate levels or offices of government. For example, the single payer healthcare issue. I come very close to agreeing with Chris. I think that's one of the most important. I think that not only getting people mental health help, but also the physical part of it also is a big stressor. It's a financial stressor. It's just a stressor of having physical issues and not being able to have it dealt with. So there's some possibilities that have already come about. So if we wanted to fight for this on the federal level, that's a big lift for just a bunch of group of folks in Monroe County here in New York State. But there's a state bill that's been sitting in committee that Democrats wrote, and Democrats won't let get out of committee. And it's been sitting there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, something like that. And they keep reintroducing it every time it turns over every 2 years, and it sits in committee and doesn't come out. And it's a single payer healthcare bill for New York State. That is something we could totally advocate for to our state senators and assembly people. And there's a gubernatorial election coming up this November. And even though the Democrats, and I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm just busting on this one party, but they're controlling the state government. And even though they were successful in making sure the Greens didn't have a candidate, we can still reach out as our people as individual voters and ask these candidates, why hasn't this bill been brought out of committee and voted on yet? And so, I mean, there's a way we can advocate at a more local level, going after all the state assembly and senators are up for re-election. So we can ask them at candidate forums and on their social media, hey, how come this thing's not out of committee yet? So that's just an example. So that would be something at the state level, as opposed to if you wanted to do universal daycare, right? That would be at the county level. So we would need to go after Adam Bello and state legislators and stuff or county legislators, sorry. And so depending on the demands we come up with, who the targets would be. So that's more into the tactics and strategy. But once we get the list of demands, then we got to figure out who the targets are and then figure out how we're going to do what. So I'm hoping I know that was long-winded, but
Susan is next. And then Linda.
Yeah, it was something that you said, but it with the gun violence, the other, besides the gangs, it's also the drug use. Because God only knows how many drug addicted people we have here, and maybe they're using guns, and they wouldn't necessarily do that if they were straight, so I do think that plays a role.
Maybe drug selling too.
Linda's next.
Yes. I agree. Yeah. Drug selling and doing drugs, both. Yeah.
Okay, Linda, that's up. You're next.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick more specifically just to the question of guns when it comes to the demands that a group might want to come up with. So, you know, what about doing something around the laws that grant unique gun rights to police officers? Let's target in on police and gun use. And you know, I get terribly freaked out when I go into Wegmans, and because I'm very anti-gun, but I don't know how to reduce gun violence, and I don't feel that criminalization and incarceration is the way to do it. But I really feel awful when I go into Wegmans and a police officer comes into the store and they have a gun on their hip. I feel very intimidated and frightened. I'd like to see laws stopping police officers from being allowed to just carry a gun around because they feel like it. I think that would be a good place to start. And then just also just really destructive guns. You know, why do we allow people to have A45s? You know, I understand the socialist, anarchist, you know, argument about, you know, weaponizing the working class, but you know, for self-defense. And but you know, do they need these terribly destructive guns and ammunition and attachments? And maybe even, you know, doing something along the lines of, well, why does anybody need more than one gun? So, you know, you can't have more than one license to drive a car. I think there are lots of demands or lots of things that we could formulate more along the lines of guns, rather than, you know, we've got plenty of people out there arguing for universal health care. I go to those demonstrations as well, but unless we're aligning those with gun-related issues, then I'm not sure whether we're going to make any segue into guns particularly.
Okay, so I was next. I agree with everything Linda just said. And I think this is again why I think whatever we come up with here, we need to keep our focus on, first of all, the subject that brought us here, which is gun violence, and how I think I would say as we go forward, whatever ideas, concepts, things we come up with, they should probably be very narrowly focused, because it could be very easy for us to shoot off in 1,000 different tangents, and then lose focus not only on the gun violence aspect, but also just have so many different different concepts that we couldn't really bring an agenda into focus. So, for example, I would say that I like what Dave, universal healthcare, of course, is another topic that's very interesting to me as well, that I, of course, support. And so Dave brought up with the Democrats not letting that bill out of committee. If we wanted to tie it into gun violence, you very easily make a case that people who are being injured every year by guns need health care. The people, to bring it to my very specific topic, thank you, Linda, the mass shootings, say both Buffalo and Uvalde, but Buffalo is relevant to us. People were not just killed, but also injured. I don't know if, and that particular massacre doesn't have to be the only one we refer to. People are injured by guns every day in the city, in the state. And so if we wanted to tie issues together, we should tie them together in a in the most natural way, and say we need universal health care, but also we need it even more so because of our reckless gun control regime that leaves so many people seriously injured, maimed, and crippled every year in the state. So by God, Democrats, it's about time you let this bill out of committee because people are being shot every day, and they need healthcare. So to sum up, I think whatever we come up with, I think we should think of ourselves as this group, and not fly off on every possible different route to violence or solution to violence, but try to narrow it down to perhaps three things that we could bring to the attention of someone or some agency. But if we have too many irons and too many fires, we're going to dilute whatever message we're trying to get across.
True.
Now, was there someone else who wanted to speak? I don't have anyone on the list.
Chris has his hand up.
Chris?
Yeah, I
Chris?
just want to mention that, it's always better to treat the disease than the symptoms. And the symptoms are these acts of violence committed with guns, but the disease is the desire to harm other human beings. And if we focus only on treating the symptoms and refuse to think about treating the disease, I think that we're going to be a lot less effective than we can be. So I agree that we don't want to go all over the place, but we also have to think holistically, and try to find an approach, that works the best.
It was Melissa.
Yeah. Back to what Chris was saying. That is why I brought up like the issues, like what's going on like in our schools, because I feel like that's where a lot of this starts, is like if people aren't being taken care of, that's how it all starts. Like if they're not being taken care of, if they don't feel safe, if they don't have a place to go, if they don't, that's kind of, I feel like that's like what Chris was saying, like that's what starts. And if we can do more to take care of that and make our I like I said, I don't know how to make people care. But it appears to me that they don't, because they're not doing any, I don't see any major things being done. Like what Susan said too about the mayor. I'm like, what is he doing? I see the same thing. I see a lot of, look at the mayor, look, hi, looking cool here. If our leaders don't give a rat's ass, then we have to put in new leaders, but I don't know. Do we have time for all that? I don't know. I guess I am a little frustrated because I feel like there's so many different problems here. And in my brain, I'm like thinking about all these different things, and I'm putting a little like this, those here, and this goes here, and this is all and I feel like it's so many things. So Jason, I hope that I hope we can figure out a way to make it simple to make our statement heard. But I really feel like we have to remember that there's an underlying problem of poverty, and our politicians just not giving a fuck about us. And I don't know how to make that not happen. That's all.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to be on stack? Dave?
Can't hear you, Dave.
Oh. Dave, we can't hear you at all. If you can hear us.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I was
Oh,
trying
there you
to
go.
make sure you
There
didn't
you
hear my mouth breathing or whatever.
Okay.
So I started writing, from taking notes, I just turned these into categories, right? There's no specific things here. I just started putting categories down. And we can still either add or subtract or change or whatever, but I'm just trying to give folks an idea of what we've been talking about, right?
Mhm.
So from here, and again, it can be changed. Nothing's in stone here. We can start fleshing out is there anything specific for any of these that we would like to make demands? I'm putting this down just to show you as a visual. I'm not saying this is it. Okay. So just taking the very top one, food. either calling for or actually have a plan to have more places for people to get decent food in our poorer areas. Just again, so I'm going to delete that in just a second. I'm just giving you a visual of a possible idea. From there, I will go green man on this one. A lot of our candidates who have run for office have called for public money, city money, because we've been running for city office, city money to help create cooperatively owned supermarkets in various parts of the city. 14621, 14613, the poor zip codes. So using public money to help create worker-owned supermarkets in places where they need to be. So that's an idea. Again, I'm going to delete this because I'm not here telling everybody what we're supposed to say. So, but I'm just giving you a visual. So, shelter. Now, this is a vague thing. That doesn't tell anybody what to do, but one of the ways it can be started off is making housing a human right, that the city and the county will see that as that. That means if anybody wants a place to live, we have to give them a place to live. Other cities have done this. It's been happening in Utah. It's in not San Francisco. I'm forgetting on the other side. There's some places that have done that. Oops. And gangs specifically, I actually have an idea about that. So I was thinking if anybody was interested in taking one of those categories and fleshing out some ideas, doing any research that you would like, and then coming back to the group the next time we decide to get together, that would be great. I figured now would be the time to start actually working on that. I think it's actually not fair for us to leave today with a completed list. Mainly for one of the main reasons is I look around the Zoom meeting and it's all a bunch of white folk. So that's an issue. Most of my handing of stuff and telling people about it were to people of color, but when a white person you don't know comes up and says, "Hey, you should check this out," I understand. So I don't see us leaving today with an actual hardcore list of stuff demands yet, but that's okay. That's all right. So that was my idea, but I see other hands up, so I'm just we don't have to make that decision right now. So
Linda is next.
Yeah, Dave just reminded me, I'd just like to echo his point about, I think that those most affected by gun violence should be leading the fight and creating the demands of government. And I just wanted to be transparent that I'm not a domestic violence survivor. I don't have any family that have ever been affected by gun violence. I live in the very white neighborhood of Brighton, Rochester. I live a very privileged white person's life, pretty middle class. And I guess I'm just wondering how the group might be able to encourage abuse survivors, mental health self-advocates, police accountability activists, anti-war veterans, other people to join the group. Is there something that we could discuss as a group to really open it up to people that know way more about this than I do from an experiential level?
Okay. Jennifer is next.
Oh, I remember, sorry. So as somebody who provides community services in the city of Rochester primarily, I can say that it is a food desert, and housing is a huge issue right now. I mean, it's an issue across the county, but it is a massive issue in the city of Rochester, with rents increasing and people's income not increasing, and People are very stressed by this. But listening to what Linda said, I think that she has an excellent point that my experience, even with gun violence, is through the eyes of the person trying to provide support to the person who's been affected by gun violence, and not as somebody who has directly been affected. And I don't know what the answer is to getting people who are directly affected involved. But I think that it is important and valuable if we can come up with a way to do that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll chip in here or chime in. So I'm looking at Dave's list, and I can't help but feel that we're veering away from the very thing that brought us into this conversation. Everything Dave has got on that list is, of course, a very good idea. Mental health, food, clothing, shelter, all of these things are legitimate, and all of them, or the lack thereof, the lack of sufficient, money, job opportunities, safe neighborhoods, food, clothing, and shelter, all of those things, of course, do contribute in their ways to every kind of crime, including gun violence. But if our topic here was domestic abuse or drug addiction, the list that Dave put up would be just as relevant. But the topic is gun violence. Gun violence itself is a bit abstract because there's all kinds of gun violence. I mean, when soldiers go to war, that's gun violence too. We could rope that in if we wanted. But I think we are in danger of losing our focus on the very specific topic we're dealing with. Gun violence is a very specific kind of violence, and unlike violence writ large, it has a very specific set of sources. A gun is a piece of technology that allows people to kill at a distance, and often to kill many people at a distance. And where it comes to suicide, it's also a technology that allows a person to very quickly end their life with the pull of a trigger, in a way that allows for less thought and consideration than, say, poisoning yourself or trying to drown yourself, which is why gun suicide is a specific type of problem, different from other ways someone might kill themselves. So I feel like we're really in danger of getting off course and not even quite narrow, of not being narrow enough in what we're actually discussing. I think gun violence has to be, well, let me put it this way, just to sum up. When I saw Dave's list, food, clothing, shelter, and he started putting in some suggestions about how to address these things, which were good. Far down the list was guns themselves. Guns ought to be at the very top of that list if we're talking about gun violence. And I think that's, I think we need to be very focused on the thing that is the gun, the technology that is the gun, the way people acquire them, the kinds of guns we let people have. That, I think, is the true root of the problem that is gun violence. All those other things are the root of all violence and all social ill, but we're not talking about all those. This is a gun violence conversation. And I think we're starting to lose focus on that with all these different types of ways, types of agendas we could bring to someone's attention. If we're not focused on guns, then we're basically just focused on social ill writ large. Susan is next.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. Like where are they getting them online? The ghost guns in particular. But where are they getting all these guns? Because we're supposed to have a license. I think you're supposed to get a license in New York for a gun. But then we're surrounded by a few states where they don't require that, like Pennsylvania, which isn't too far from us. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the gun laws are for New York or Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so I think that's an important topic. I agree with you.
Chris has got his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a definite kind of split in terms of about half of us want to talk about only guns, and half of us want to talk about more solutions. I mean, I think if the topic is victims of domestic violence, and someone said, well, you know, one of the factors is housing and poverty, because victims of domestic violence may not be able to move out and get a place of their own. And we were to turn around and say, no, we can't talk about that. We can't talk about housing to help domestic violence victims. I mean, that would be a mistake. And so I think, you know, at least my opinion is that, you know, we can't just ignore these things. We can't take this, like, cut something out of the picture and just look at it without context. I just don't think we will be as nearly as effective as we could be being honest with that.
If I could just respond to that very quickly. I
Linda
mean, I
has her
agree.
hand up.
I do agree with that, but I think ultimately we're going to have to come up with something. If we're going to call this group, you know, some sort of you know, conversation that is going to lead to something that can actually be proposed, it still has to be narrowly focused. So we can't, you know, ultimately, you know, the source of all violence is human nature, and we can't do anything about that. But gun violence is something that we can do something about, or at least have a focused and insightful approach to. And I just don't think we should be going all over the place looking for solutions under every rock. I think we gotta, you know, stick with the more specific topic that is gun violence itself. And I think, Linda, did you have your hand up? You look like you were ready to jump in there.
Yeah, just addressing Chris. I really, Chris said in a couple of comments ago that we're talking about, you know, symptoms and causes, and he's wanting to concentrate on the symptoms, and he's kind of extrapolating that the rest of us, or some of us, are wanting to concentrate on causes, which is having access to guns. And I don't really think there's a difference between the two. I don't think it's an either or situation. I think that if you're talking about symptoms of gun violence being poverty and access to healthcare and wages and unions and things like that, and food, until you get that sorted out, you also have to kind of also concentrate on the causes of gun violence and access to guns and those kinds of things at the same time, until you can actually address those really deep-seated social things. I don't think it is an either or an or. I think that this kind of group is running the kind of like the risk of appearing to be the concerned with solving the social problems connected to gun violence, or the gun violence itself in terms of guns. And they're two sides of the same coin. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, well, I don't see anybody else's hand up, so it's not. I don't. My attention, which doesn't, I'm the same as any the other 7 people here, is it's not an either or. That it needs to be on the dealing with guns themselves needs to be on our list of things to work on as well. But they if to skip one hat, I'll use Linda's thing of the same coin, to just focus on one side of the coin and not the other, I don't think you're going to be as effective, if effective at all, to be honest with you. The gun issue, it has so many ties to both state and really federal governments as well, that without going after the other things, I just don't think you're going to be as effective, in my opinion. I may be wrong. I think the research says that too. But we'll have to look for that. Jason, you're muted. Jason, you're muted.
You should have just let me keep going. Just watch me flail my hands. So again, And since no one had their hand up, I'll just do this quick. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with what I fear, I don't want to repeat myself or sound like I don't hear what you guys are saying. I do, and I do agree. But this is the gun violence conversation, not the food desert conversation, not the poverty conversation. Of course, any problem you name has roots in 1,000 other problems, but we have to be specific about guns themselves and the kind of violence that only guns cause, or else we're not really talking about gun violence at all. We're talking about violence or crime or social ill more broadly. And I guess I'll just to put a finer point on it. I of course have been talking about this joint statement and I'm writing these op-eds, and I've been participating in this other gun chat with other Greens, which is very narrowly focused on mass shootings. It does branch out a bit into the broader question of everyday gun violence, but specifically my interest in gun violence has to do with mass shootings themselves and why that problem never gets solved. In the conversations I've had about that, I've kept it focused on mass shootings because that's the topic that was the subject of the conversation that brought in the other people in the other group I'm a member of. This conversation here is about gun violence. We have to talk about guns and not be worried about how we're going to solve drought in Ethiopia, which somehow does connect to gun violence in the country, but it's a very circuitous route, just like Ukraine must have something to do with gun violence in this country, but only barely. If we're not talking specifically about guns and or the specific kind of crimes that are committed with guns, and instead of just branching out into every other topic, we may as well just not even call this the gun violence conversation, because now we've roped in every other thing that we would like to deal with, from healthcare to food deserts to poor SAT scores. But we'll be so unfocused in our solutions that we'll have nothing to say or to demand of anyone that has to do specifically with gun violence. If we go to a city councilman and say, okay, we have a gun violence conversation going, and our solution includes 10 things, of which guns are number 11. It just doesn't seem to me that we're even talking about gun violence anymore.
Okay, I'll jump in. Well, I am looking at the time, and I do need some couple other things we need to do, but nobody said dealing with guns is at the bottom of an agenda. This is a gun violence group because 3 weeks ago, that's what we called the meeting, and that's what we called this meeting to try and attract people. We're not tasked by anybody. If as a group we decide that there is no one solution and focusing on many things that create people to get angry enough to shoot somebody with, we can do that. We're not there's nothing in stone that says that it has to be just about getting rid of guns, and there's nothing that says that it has to be just focused on guns. So there's nothing that has to be. If we as a group decide that what's important, that it connects, if we want it to be just gun violence, and that, again, I'm losing, I lost the word I wanted, that it had to be just that focused, right? It can be, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to do anything. We're together and using up our time because we care about this stuff. So I just hope everyone understands that we don't have to do anything. That sounded horrible, but I hope you know what I meant, the spirit I meant that in. We're not under any obligation that we have to take a specific path or direction. And if other things get solved from the demands that we have, great. It's not a bad thing. But if they do affect gun violence, and if they do affect violence in any case, if they make our society better, awesome. And I just see Linda's hand. I know I'm not the stack person, but.
I just have a question for the group. I think, you know, there's gun violence on a universal level and the problem of guns and violence, but there's also the issue of gun violence in Rochester and what's happening in our particular city. And, you know, it seems to me that you know, there have been, you know, there's gang violence, there's gun violence connected to gangs. There's the predominantly white police force that have been responsible for a certain amount of the suicides and shootings of Black men in Rochester. When we're talking about gun violence, as a group, are we going to be concentrating on the problem of gun violence in Rochester and doing a detailed analysis about that, and then looking at the causes of that and making specific recommendations based on our city? It doesn't seem that a small group can look at something that's larger than just its own specific location, I guess. Gun violence in Chicago is not the same thing as gun violence in Rochester, or mass shootings in the Netherlands or anywhere else they're happening are not the same as any kinds of shootings that are happening in Rochester. You know, as a group based in Rochester, we haven't had a mass shooting yet, but we've got a horrifically high homicide rate as a group. Isn't that what we should perhaps be focusing on, rather than trying to solve the problem of mass shootings when it's really out of our purview and hasn't happened in our own backyard yet? So just a couple of, I guess, rhetorical questions.
Yep. Melissa?
I was just gonna say, I freaking love that, Linda. And that's basic. I mean, when I first joined this, when Dave and I first talked about it, that was actually, I mean, of course I'm concerned about the country and the world. And I mean, I'm a compassionate person. So I absolutely care about gun violence everywhere. But I feel like we're you know, people, feel like we can't really do too much about everywhere else, but we can do something here. And I love that. I would really love for us to just, if we can concentrate on what's going on just in our backyard here and start there. I mean, maybe something more can happen, but I agree. I think it'd be great if we could just stick with what we have locally and go from there.
If you don't mind, I'm looking at the time, and again, I want to respect everyone's time and stuff. So how about this? I have an idea, because this was actually brought up a couple of times throughout tonight, about Pathways to Peace was mentioned. I actually have connections to that organization. They do get funded by the city, but I don't think they're part of the city. I don't know. It might be complicated. I don't remember. But I have connections there. How about also on the agenda is when we're going to get together again. For the next time we get together, I invite someone from Pathways to Peace to come and talk to us about what they do. We can ask questions about gang violence and how that connects, and even, you know, shooting in general. That was a weird sentence. About gun violence in general in Rochester. I can probably get Anthony Hall to come, if not somebody else. As long as it fits in with their schedule, I can totally do that. Would that be okay?
I think that's a great idea. I think it addresses a lot of what's been discussed here, and right on the nose what Susan was saying earlier.
Okay. And I would also like to volunteer. Here's what I'll do. I almost wondered if we'd be able to like go away with everybody picking a topic to like start doing research or come up with ideas for, but let's wait till maybe the next meeting. But how about this? I'll make the obvious one for folks who know me. I'll do the obvious one. I would like to create a super rough draft about possibly demands that could be made that has to do with schools. I'm a teacher,
With what?
schools.
Cool.
So just as an example, to give an idea of what possibly something that we could do, and I'll even, and if you say no, Jason, that's totally okay. If you'd be interested too, maybe doing one that's about guns for the Rochester area, that's not as expansive as what the work you've been doing with greens from around the country. If you would be able to take either work you've already done, or it might be just an extra thing. Sorry. If you wanted to come up with an example for the next time we get together, if you don't think you're ready for it, if you don't have time right now, that's totally cool.
I've got some ideas.
Okay, I just figured because you're really adamant, and I just wanted to have you start fleshing that part out, and I'll do one on schools, and if we look like this could work, then we can. Sorry, I'll do this to you again. Sorry. And again, this isn't like anything set in stone. Then we can start picking out some other things if we feel that works for us. And I also am going to, when we pick the next date of when to get together, I will try I will try smarter, not harder, to get people who don't look like me on this call. Now, my wife says there's nothing wrong about the way I look, but y'all know what I mean, right? She's weird anyway. I don't trust her with that anyway. So I will not only getting Anthony or someone from Pathways to Peace. I have some connections in the Latino community. I will start taking advantage. I started dipping my toe there, reaching out, and got some positive responses, but I didn't have anybody say, yes, tell me when it is. I will be more forceful with it now. And I will do that. Because we do have just a few minutes left. And also, if you also have a chance, how about this for homework for everybody, if this is okay? Start maybe brainstorming an idea. If you could come with one suggested name for this group. It can be an acronym. It doesn't have to be. That's
hard.
I know it is. That's why I don't want to do it. I'd rather research gun stats than do that, Jen.
No, right?
I
think we all know that we're going to be called the T-Birds when everything's set.
Whatever. Something. If just in your mind, if you have like any ideas or whatever, just jot it down on a scrap paper. Like I got these big pile of scrap papers all over the place that I have ideas on. If next time we get together, we can maybe just make that. It's just so much easier to call us something than to, keep saying this group. I also, let's just start talking about when we can get together again. I'm going to pull up the calendar. Of course. All right. And I might even share the screen if I don't have anything too weird on my calendar. There it is. Okay. So today's the 3rd. No, that's not the 3rd. Today's the 9th. Oh, I just saw that blue thing. Oh yeah, it's just my anniversary. No big deal. It was a joke. So
today?
No, the 3rd. That's why I saw the blue up here, and I was like, oh no, that was last week. So okay, so we're here at the 9th. 23rd, okay?
Sure.
Looks good for me.
Okay. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. No, it's not all day. As much as I like you people, nobody needs that. All right, this is gonna put it in stone. If it's in Google Calendar.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
All right.
7 o'clock. I can't see what you're doing because I'm putting it in my calendar.
Right. Okay, here, let me stop sharing. So we've got the 23rd at 7 p.m.
Perfect.
And I will reach out. I think I'm going to reach out to Anthony tonight.
All right.
I'm not going to say he owes me a favor, but he kind of does. So he doesn't, but he doesn't, but he kind of does. So I'll ask him to come. And it's something he'd want to do anyway. So that's totally fine. And then I'll just leave before we open it up to any announcements. Are there just a quick brainstorm on ways to get more people here that look like me or not? Let's just talk in general. We've been doing.
How are we promoting this already? Just Facebook?
Facebook events. We've been using the Green Party's email list, which is 700 people. However, we get about 100, between 100 and 120 people to open them. We actually have a pretty good opening rate. We actually do okay with that.
Well, I got one simple idea would be, since right now, for those of you who are on Greens, right now we're collecting signatures from local Greens for our state committee representatives. Why not just bring this very group, this very topic up with them as we go and get their signatures, invite them directly to participate in the next meeting.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, there's interesting things with that. Greens are an interesting bunch. They tend to like, I think me, Jason, and Chris we are unique. We tend to stay in one place. We don't move like every 3 months, and our phone number stays the same. Right, our phone numbers stay the same. But Greens are man, they're a nomadic bunch. I gotta say, they don't stay in one place too much. So the two of the 5 signatures I got today said, "Oh, that's not my address anymore." I was like, "Well, fine. We have to use your old address because that's where you're registered to vote." So they're an interesting bunch. But yeah, absolutely, without question, I've been doing that. But
We put. I mean, I know. Is this? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being old. Can we put like some things out, like some flyers or anything? Is that lame? Like to some places, like I'm just thinking like the co-op, for example, was one of like the Genesee co-op, places, something like that. I mean, I don't know if that's a thing or not.
So I had
is that old? Did nobody look at folder? People
No,
not
we
look
do.
at
We
things?
still do stuff like that.
And I've put them in just about every laundromat that I could find. And I mean, I'm talking
so
like
it didn't, no.
like 15 of them. I spent a day driving around the city at like 15 different laundromats.
You
So yeah.
guys
Why don't we do something like everybody on the call, you've got to reach out to 3 of your friends and invite them to the next meeting, something like that. I mean, you might get 1, you might get none, you might get 3, but choose 3 of your friends that you think are really interested, who have something to say about this topic, or who've more importantly been directly affected by gun violence, and get them to come along. I can do that. I can say I'll invite 3 friends.
I'll reach out definitely to the people I'd already invited and see if they would be interested in the next one. I know Dave, at least one of them,
Yes.
I think he would be interested if
he
we
needs
can.
He needs to be here.
I know he would really be perfect to be here.
It might not fit his schedule, I understand, but
I know.
He would be
I'm gonna
amazing
reach
to
out.
have involved in this. He really would.
Do you know on Facebook the GSL show? Have you seen that?
Oh, is that kid?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I have no
run into
idea.
him.
I could actually I actually watch his shows. They're pretty powerful actually. He was shot at a couple of times.
Mhm.
But I can invite him.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because he likes exposure. You never know. I mean, and maybe he could help get more of the Black community interested. So
Be awesome.
I just think, I think people are kind of turned off by parties at this point, and I think we should just be people concerned about gun violence.
Oh yeah, and like I said earlier, that was always the last meeting. The last time we were together was supposed to be just the Green Party's one-time monthly meeting, and everybody was
Right.
like, "No, let's keep
It
doing
turned
this."
out to be
Turn into something more.
Yeah, no, which is awesome, which is really great.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
like,
and
no,
I-
it
and I-
shouldn't be.
I'm not part of the Green Party. I don't even want to be part of the Democratic Party, really. But it's just, like, I mean, I voted across the aisle. Like, I really liked Alex a lot. I thought he was awesome and he had a lot to say. And I think a lot of people just weren't giving him a chance. And I'm not sure even why, because he was very intelligent. Maybe too intelligent. I don't know.
Susan, we could talk about that offline. That's I have a bunch of theories on that one.
Okay. I'm just saying.
I love that title, Jennifer, by the way, the one you just put in the chat. I think that's really cool.
I think Susan just said that, and I just typed it in. People who are concerned about gun violence.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's what we are, right?
PCGV.
Yep.
All right. Well, I wrote that down and I'll put it in the notes. But yeah, let's come back on the 23rd, and we'll just. It's good to have a bunch of choices, and we'll figure it out. But yeah, so
That was
maybe
mine. I'm done.
Okay, I know. So maybe someone will be walking down the street and then think of an awesome acronym that
Yeah,
You never know.
I
Yeah.
agree.
will be called guns with a Z or something. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
There you go.
We're not doing that.
Great.
All right, the 23rd. I think, unless hold on, I'm gonna do this.